Hello, I'm going to read you the first chapter of my sci-fi novella, Suluti. Chapter 1, Caribou Tracks. Anguti woke up to the sound of his sled dogs howling in the distance. Feeding time? He thought to himself and figured, it can't be, it's only Sunday, they just ate yesterday. They were howling as if his sister Pauna was approaching with whale meat. He got up and looked out the window towards the seashore where the dogs were tied up. No Pauna in sight. This made sense, as she was away on a hunting trip with her husband, son, and 4 sled dogs of their own. With Anguti, they ran an outfitting business out of their multi-family home. What did not make sense was the intensity in the howling. It was an intensity he recognized, but the intensity was out of place because, as he stared out the window and across the large frozen bay, he could see there was nothing to howl about. Anguti could also see that the wind had blown a snowdrift over his Suluti, a machine his grandpa and namesake invented in 2030. The invention of the Suluti made snowmobiles obsolete. Groaning at the sight of that and the thought of shoveling it out, even if it was just a small drift, Anguti quickly forgot about the dogs that had already stopped their howling. He had a lot to do before the day ended, so he got dressed and started to think about preparing breakfast for his wife, whom he heard was just finishing a bath for their 9-month-old twins. To his surprise, when he entered the kitchen, he smelled and saw that she had already boiled the makdak. Ah, why should I be surprised, he thought. Micah knows I have to go to the cabin today and make it back in time for the seminar. Before the twins were born, Anguti was usually the first one up, and so became the habitual breakfast maker, but not on this fateful day. Micah entered the kitchen just as Anguti was placing the boiled makdak on 2 plates. She had Pulik on her back in her amot and placed Napu in the baby seat. Pulik's turn in Anana's amot, eh? Anguti gave a kunik on Pulik's cheek and Micah's neck. And how is Napukulu? Without a fuss, little Napu let Anguti tickle him and kunik him on his belly. Pauna and her crew are due back before noon. One of them can take Napu while you're out. I heard they got 2 seals, so I'll be busy today too. Even though they had advanced technology and used it all to their advantage as deemed necessary, many of the traditional Inuit ways of life were still present in the year 2065. Self-heating solar-powered footwear was available on the market, but traditional footwear was still in demand. Micah looked forward to processing the sealskins to make kamiks, a process that required many steps and knowledge going back an unknown number of generations. She was an expert at processing sealskin for outdoor wear in the winter, especially kamiks. The Suluti had the capability of hovering a few feet above ground and water, but sled dogs were still a common way of transportation. Sled dogs did more than transport. They also had the ability to smell and hear important things nearby, whether it was prey, predator, trails of various kinds, or a way home in bad weather. Like their human companions, they too were eager to return home after a long time away. They too had loved ones they yearned to see upon a return from a long absence. Okay, well, I better get the Suluti out of the snow. and maybe this will be the last time I forget to use the garage." Anguti cursed at himself for forgetting this, especially on a windy night. After Anguti finished shoveling, he made the Suluti move into the garage with a simple voice recognition command. Suluti could move a distance up to 9 feet from a fob or wristwatch without physical contact. Once past 9 feet, they shut down automatically after a gentle touchdown. Anguti figured an hour or so in the garage would warm his Suluti sufficiently to avoid ice buildup throughout the day's travels to his cabin site across the frozen bay. 1 hour was about all he needed to pack the sled. He had already assembled a few items for packing the night before. The sled looked very much like a traditional Inuit sled, a kamutik. But like the Suluti, it also had a built-in hovering system, enabling it to hover up to 2 feet above ground at the flick of a remote switch. This meant that only 2 dogs were required to pull a full load, and 1 dog could manage a lighter load. 3 dogs could pull a train of 2 or 3 of the smallest sleds. For these reasons, most sleds were smaller than the traditional size, and they could also be pulled over snowless ground if the hovering mechanism was employed. Anguti's grandpa and namesake became famous for the technology he invented and incorporated into the snowmobiles of his bygone era. The increasingly shorter winters in Canada's north inspired Grandpa Anguti to come up with something to prolong the skidoo season. Grandpa Anguti called it Sulutitut technology. In Inuktitut, Sulutitut means like a wing or like a feather, depending on the dialect. The technology rendered the heavy machines light as a feather, as if they had wings. A few years later, the same technology was adapted for dog sleds by his son, Joannesi. "Yep," young Anguti said aloud to himself as he thought about his lead dog. "Amaruk can handle this one by herself, even without the hover feature." He had considered just using a pack for Amaruk to carry home and let her hitch a ride on his Suluti for the trip out. But he decided to use the smallest sled instead to give Amaruk the exercise she loved. He knew he could make the trip to the cabin alone in 45 minutes, although as a rule, he would always go with at least one other traveler, either 2-footed or 4-footed, for safety reasons. Having a dog accompany him with a sled, he could make it to the cabin in 2 hours atop the sea ice. Meanwhile, Amaruk was watching from a short distance and started getting excited as she saw Anguti lay out her harness. As Anguti started walking towards her, she heard incoming traffic from around the bend. Her brother was the lead dog for Pauna's team, and now she began to smell the seal they had caught. Anguti looked in the direction of Amaruk's sudden stare. Anguti recognized the group even from a far distance and shouted towards Micah in the house to let her know. As the group traveled their last stretch home from their own cabin site, Anguti took his Suluti out of the garage and cleared a few miscellaneous objects further out of the way, as he knew they would need room to unpack a load from 2 sleds and 3 Suluti. Each Suluti had a small compartment. Anguti was done with his own preparations, and instead of harnessing Amaruk, he took the liberty of sitting a moment to watch the hunters approach. His 3 dogs began to howl their welcome because they knew they would get some fresh seal treats within minutes. Atata will be happy to hear we saw some more caribou tracks just on the other side of the hill, so near. Pauna yelled out to Anguti before she came to a stop. She was short but strong, and she was in her element when out on the land. Pauna's husband was also more comfortable out on the land than anywhere else. Even though he was of Austrian descent, he loved the treeless tundra, and he loved it most when it was covered with snow. And he was very good with sled dogs. Instead of driving all the way to the house, he stayed back to unharness his 4 dogs and tie them up with the others. He handed over a rifle that he had slung over his shoulder to Manu. Their son, Manu, already a very accomplished hunter at age 17, looked a lot like his mother, only taller, and instead of inheriting her extreme gregariousness, he inherited a mixture of his father's quiet nature and his mother's boldness.